is Humanist Perspective, presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following a few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the New Orleans Humanist Perspective. My name is Charlotte Clausen, President of the Board of Directors for the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, which is a sponsor of this program, and I will be your host. If you would like to know more about NOSHA, please go to our website, www.nosha.info, and you will find out more about our events and activities there. As the normal flow of our program, we usually do a brief bio of our guest, but this time I felt like the information would be intertwined with the program itself, that our guest will be talking about his work, and I knew that that would take care of some of that information. But what I did was compile some information, that just a little bit that I thought our audience would be interested in. My guest is Jason Bradbury. He's an independent investigative journalist and a freelance videographer. He's done groundbreaking work on everyone from former Senator David Vitter to former New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin, and he operates the blog American Zombie. He's an avid golfer, and he has actually represented NOSHA, our sponsoring program, at a city council meeting that had to do with some issues about some discrimination, and so we were proud to have him do that. He is a West Bank resident and a part-time treasure hunter, which is a topic for another time. He's a graduate of the University of Mississippi with a degree in journalism, and I guess in many ways you are kind of your own cottage industry, and so I thought we would get started there for you to tell us about how and when all of this began.
Yeah, wow, when did it all begin? Well, I when I went to Ole Miss, I got a degree in anthropology and also in broadcast journalism. And with the idea that I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker. I moved to New Orleans and fell in love with it, but I was kind of young and immature, and I'd always wanted to work for National Geographic. So I moved to Washington, D.C. to try to work for them. Didn't end up with National G, but I ended up working for the Smithsonian for about 3 years, and the Human Studies Film Archives, and got homesick for New Orleans and came back and decided that I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to tell stories about New Orleans in specific. Jumping forward, I made a documentary in 2000, it was released in 2006, about the New Orleans public school system called Left Behind. And that was the school system pre-Katrina, which, as we know, at that time was the worst public school system in the country, easily. So what we did was we documented that, the politics of it, and we also followed 3 young men through the course of their senior year, and John McDonough. So that was kind of my foray into the journalism world of for New Orleans, and that led to me starting the blog, The American Zombie. And
can you explain why you chose that name?
Yeah, it was right after Katrina. 2006, July 4th is when I started it, and I was really frustrated. I felt like, the country was ignoring our plight. I felt like there was a lot of misinformation, and I felt at the time that we were zombies. So
I understand.
The idea is that I don't want to be a zombie. I don't want to be an American zombie. I want to be like one of the guys who pays attention and see if I can make a difference. So that was where the name originated from.
Okay, that makes sense then. I like that. I guess we kind of should start, since we're talking about your work in that. It was apparent that you hadn't published anything in over a year, and would you explain why that was?
Yeah, well, it's kind of twofold. It's when I first started the blog, I was blogging every day, and I was following stories that basically I was kind of doing the same thing that the paper was, the same thing. I mean, to a lesser degree, obviously, because I'm just one person. But over the course of the blog, what I realized is that if I'm going to really serve the community in a journalistic fashion, it would be better for me to do long-form stories. So instead of trying to, just publish every single day, what I decided to do was do deep dives into stories. And bigger stories that that local reporters just don't have the time to do. So that got me. I kind of just switched gears into a slower gear, if you will.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's.
Okay. Well, then I guess the main part of our show should be what you're working on now. So it seems like you have several things in the fire.
Yeah. I just published a story today. So. It was under a year, by the way. So
under a year. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did write extensively about the BP oil spill settlement for about 2.5 years.
Okay.
And what was going on with that settlement, and that really got me fascinated in the legal community and the justice system, and how these settlements work on a very large $1 billion settlement scale. So. An issue actually just arose like 2 months ago that came across my table that really fascinated me, and that story is basically about a bank in New York City called Esquire Bank, and what the bank is doing is it's basically forming a niche market for for class action settlements and what's called MDL, or multi-district litigation settlements. I don't want to bore you with all of the banking details and how it works, but essentially the question has become, is the bank commoditizing the justice system? Is it looking at it as a speculative market? And what if they are doing this, and Wall Street is now trading, they're a public company, on their access to these funds, these settlement funds, and serving as the bank for these settlement funds. What are the pitfalls? What are the opportunities for corruption? What are the hazards of doing this in the justice system?
Oh, wow!
Right.
So it's like wherever there's money, there's always a chance for corruption.
Exactly, there's always been somewhat of a Chinese wall in between, the justice system and. I would say Wall Street, but now this is like, have we crossed the line? I mean, it's really for lawyers and judges and people in the legal community, I think, in the banking community. I think they'll be really interested in it, especially on the wake of the first NBC scandal and, things that went on there. So that's really who it's written for, honestly. But, that's not to say I wouldn't want the public to dive in. It's just not, it's not going to keep maybe not keep your attention too long.
Well, is there some way to say if you thought the public would like to digest it, is there one thing that you think sticks out for the public as what is happening that they should be aware of?
Well, yeah, locally, it's like everything I do is, written with a local flair. I mean, that's who I really want to write for is New Orleanians. So, one of the key subjects of the story, an attorney named Russ Herman, and when I interviewed him, he actually used Mardi Gras Indian references in the story. So I kind of wrote the story with this Mardi Gras Indian palette.
Okay.
But yeah, so it's.
So that alone might be worth reading.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's, I didn't go too heavily into that metaphor, but
Okay.
it's a fascinating story. It's it could have far-reaching implications, and we're waiting on a judge's decision.
So is this just the beginning, or is this coming to a kind of a where
It's come to a head in the sense of this case. So we're waiting on Judge Fallon's decision to see if he's going to move a massive amount of money back into the bank, because he's moved it out after a number of attorneys complained that it shouldn't be in there, because they believe there was a conflict of interest because one of the lead attorneys in the settlement actually had interest in the bank and was on the board of directors. So, yeah. Now, that sounds really egregious at first hand, but I mean, it's important to read the story and understand that he disclosed that before.
I see.
Yeah. So
yes, there was nothing being hidden necessarily.
Well, we don't know.
Okay.
I mean, if it's hidden, it's hidden, right?
Yeah,
but,
that's true.
But that aspect of it wasn't.
Right. At least it was known. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as just before we move on to the next one, what made you just, since that sounds like it's something very technical and outside your realm of expertise, how did you decide I'm going to take this on?
It's really what I'm interested in,
Okay.
And
so even that kind
yeah,
of...
once I started the story with the BP settlement, I got really fascinated with these MDL cases and how they work, and it really affects people's lives. It affected,
Yes.
the BP money that came in was instrumental, I think, in it rejuvenated this city to a large extent, and it also made ripe the possibility for corruption among local city governments, and that's actually the next story.
Okay, sure, and that's a great segue
Yeah, it is.
To that, because that is very local.
Right.
Why don't you tell us about that one?
Yeah, when I originally started, I wanted to focus most of my efforts on Orleans Parish because that's where I live. That was my immediate community. But as I started learning more and more about New Orleans government and the history of corruption in the state, it's like it led me into other areas. So I had met a whistleblower, essentially, from Plaquemines Parish. Her name was Michelle Wilcox, and about 5 years ago. And she had laid out a lot of issues that were going on in Plaquemines Parish that were myriad and overwhelming. So it took me. I wanted to write about it, but I felt like it's just too much at the time. But I stayed in touch with her, and she continued to tell me these things that were going on. And I started about a year ago. I started seriously looking into all of these issues that were going on.
Just so it's part of the discussion, because she was a whistleblower in a particular industry within...
She was a whistleblower, I would say, in Plaquemines. She's been a source for reporters, mainstream reporters here in local news. For corruption issues, particularly when Jeff Hingle was
okay, so
was
like
indicted.
Real government issues. Okay.
Yeah. So as I looked further into it, I realized how deep it was and how, just how widespread the corruption was in Plaquemines. And what had happened essentially was you've got this small parish which is at the end of the earth, literally, right? And it's disappearing very rapidly.
So there's not much of it left, but it's hanging
There's not,
on.
but and that plays into the story.
Okay.
So it's the most valuable commodity in the parish is mud. And if you've got a mud pit, which the Army Corps of Engineers uses to build levees up, then you've got a mud farm, and that's a really big deal there. But
wow,
yeah, it is. It's a very fascinating story. But and Plaquemines has always had this history of a very colorful history with Leander Perez, Judge Perez, and it was always kind of run like a fiefdom, if you will. So basically what happened is since 2006, these two events happened where a tremendous amount of federal money was flushed into the parish. Katrina. They began with Katrina.
Right.
Billions of dollars came in from Katrina. And then, of course, the BP oil spill, which was, Plaquemines was ground zero. It's Venice. It's right there where all the oil was washing in. So a tremendous amount of federal dollars came flowing into the parish from that. Well, obviously when that much money comes into a very small parish, the opportunity for corruption is extreme.
And for money to just disappear into a myriad of
and documents disappearing and actual expenditures and all of these things have happened. And Michelle has been a warrior, really, and documented as much as she possibly could, along with she's got 3 to 4 friends that have helped her as well. All women, and I usually that's what I want to throw that in. It's like I usually find that it's the women that are actually doing the work in these stories. So and they've done a tremendous amount of work, and they're being currently I think they're being railroaded and trying to be sequestered because of what they're doing.
Okay, and so she all this time has been a city government or parish government.
She was originally she worked for Billy Nungesser.
Oh, okay.
Who I would say if there was a new king of the fiefdom, it would be him. And so she originally worked for him, but she was privy to documents and to information because of that she kept, that were actually government documents. And now for some reason, a lot of those documents don't exist from the government when they're asked for them. So that's going to be the initial offering that in the first story, we're going to look at what was missing, why it was missing. Okay. And take a look at where did all of this money go.
And I guess when we think about how organic these kinds of issues are as far as dealing with climate change issues that are really affecting our state, and realizing that then we have this going on, and it's almost as if we have enough problems just dealing with the fact that our state is slowly disappearing, and eventually all of these things that they've predicted are just, in some cases there's probably things that are true about it that people out in the rest of the country don't realize about it, and yet then you have this blatant corruption that isn't there enough to worry about in places like that?
It's cognitive dissonance on a level that that absolutely floors me. Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around how all of it. It really is, I think, the next great American novel if I was that talented enough to write it. But I don't think I'm talented enough to write the novel. But maybe knew all the King's Men,
Right.
So my job, I think, now is to tell Michelle's story. I think that usually the stories I try to tell are focused through one person. The BP settlement, I was inspired by a person that a woman who was, I thought, railroaded out of the claims office, Christine Ratana, and I kind of told the story of what happened there and why it happened, and how these big power-hungry guys and the top of the cream of the crop in litigation, national litigation, had basically used her as a scapegoat, and that was so. There's always kind of a redemptive factor, I think, in what I'm doing. And it's real. I'm not making it up. It's there. And in this case, I think Michelle's really captured my attention and what she's done, and I want to I want people to know what she's done.
And that story has yet to be published.
No, it has not. It has not because I'm
Why don't you
juggling so many.
Tell us your website just to make sure we keep it out there.
It's theamericanzombie.com.
The American Zombie.
Right. It's not American Zombie. It's The American Zombie.
Okay. My apologies.
Yeah,
I guess
okay.
It was such a cool name. I left the "the" off. Well, I'm just curious. Before we move on to another your third story, I'm curious, has any large network news people, do you ever get tapped for you're doing some work that they couldn't even begin to know where to start?
All the time. Yeah, all the time. That happens.
Oh, okay. So it isn't, you're not just doing this and kind of in your own bubble of all this great information, but no one else pays attention.
Yeah, no. Okay. It's I'm tapped a lot. Actually, especially during the BP case, I was tapped a lot for information. I actually did just publish a story with someone else back in January, so about.
So you haven't been a total slacker, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. So
Okay.
yeah, but it's a long story. I probably shouldn't go into that.
Yeah.
But anyway, no, I. What was the question again? I
The
forgot.
question was, are you tapped on by national news because of the seriousness of the story?
Yeah, I am, and especially with the BP case, the David Vitter story, obviously, that was a big
you
deal.
on the map.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Well, that didn't put me on the map.
Well-
I would say that the Nagin story was the first thing.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I would feel like there should be some reward for the effort that you're putting into. I mean, like on a level of being on 60 Minutes or something. I mean,
I could care less about that, honestly.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I that's not what I'm after. That's not my goal in any way. I get tremendous joy out of doing this, out of telling stories, out of researching them, out of talking to people.
Right. You're kind of a researcher at heart.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's I want to learn. That's really I want to learn how things work. I want to learn. I want to be a humanist. I want to ask scientific questions and say, what is real? I know what has been said about you, even in an interview, but I want to know what's real. What's happened, and that's kind of my driving force in life.
Okay. Well, I know you listed another story, Uranium One, so I figure we.
Yeah, this is this is a really complicated story, but it is the one most passionate thing in my life because this is not New Orleans based. This is where I grew up in Paducah, Kentucky. Right. So what happened is I'm going to try to run through this really quick. After the Cold War, not after the Cold War, after World War II, all of our uranium operations for the Department of Defense was done in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. We decided we needed to split that up for safety reasons. Right. So we developed a plant in Paducah, Kentucky called the Paducah Gaseous Diffusion Plant, and then another satellite plant in Portsmouth, Ohio. Okay. And at the time, the only way we needed to enrich uranium was through a process called gaseous diffusion, which is very nasty. It's a horribly nasty process and not really safe. Okay. So that essentially contaminated the entire area in Paducah over the past 5 decades. That story's never really come out, how bad the contamination is. The Department of Defense did admit, and the Department of Energy did admit, there was a problem back in the 80s. And from that, the Sick Nuclear Workers Program was born. But the real problem has never really been examined. So there's that. It's the contamination issue, but also the real the that's current in terms of Uranium-1 is that basically all of the material that was coming from Russia, the uranium and enriched uranium even up to plutonium levels was coming into Paducah and to a satellite plant called Honeywell plant in Metropolis, Illinois. So there are two plants there. And we do have some pictures of the plants too.
Right.
And
I think we had one overhead shot of the plants, and I think you have some maps as well.
So that's the PGDP, the Paducah Gaseous Diffusion Plant. That picture is probably circa 60s, I would think, and that's with Paducah's called the Atomic City. We're very proud of the plant, and it's.
I'd always thought of Oak Ridge having that.
They fight over those things. That's just another shot of the plant. It's since been decommissioned. It was decommissioned in 2010, I believe. Because we now have better ways of enriching uranium than this. However, that's part of the Honeywell plant, which is right across the river in Metropolis, Illinois. Okay. And that's Oak Ridge, obviously. And Union Carbide was the company that did originally run both of the plants. And what you're looking at there is cancer clusters. And from different types of cancers. It doesn't, the image is not going to tell me what it is, but it's, everything from lung cancer to airborne to leukemia. And you'll see in coal country there's a lot, but you'll see right below, down through the river, there's a lot of cancer clusters
that kind of flow
along the river because most of this stuff dumps out into the Mississippi and Ohio. So there's, the story's never been told. That's my goal. I have a lot of friends who are sick, are dying from that area.
Who lived their whole lives or at least were affected by it.
Yeah. So that's part of it. But the real story is that uranium-1, all of that material that came from Russia all came into these two plants since the early 90s.
Okay.
So, the whole uranium-1 scandal is very interesting, the truth behind it, because the company Uranium-1 didn't really do anything. They were created as kind of a wedge company just to keep quiet about what was being shipped into Paducah. So that's the gist of the story.
I see. And so you mentioned the fact that Kentucky is Senator Mitch McConnell's state. So
it's a very complicated story, and already there's been some indictments from Mueller surrounding that, and including the Podesta group. They're sealed indictments. We don't know what they're for, but the people who orchestrated Uranium-1 were Manafort, who hired the Podesta group. Okay. So you've got this bipartisan shift, and it's not a partisan issue. It's been going on for a while, and hopefully I'll be able to get the real story out about what's happened over the past few decades.
Okay. Well, I mean, it sounds like this one is got a lot of implications. That's I would
huge.
Think you would
it's
be.
the biggest story of my life, and I don't know that I'll be able to pull it off, but I'm trying.
Are there other people who you could partner with that would help you?
I'm looking into that for sure.
Because this does seem like it is on a level that would require some balancing between different. Skill sets or just the
many skill
massiveness
sets.
of it. I'm just really. It's very impressive that you would take these on, and certainly not having the expectation that you're going to be handsomely rewarded magically down the line.
If I can expose the story for the sake of the people that my family and friends that I grew up with, that's really my reward.
It has a personal aspect of it because it is affecting the lives of your people.
Right.
And that must be very hard, and it makes sense why you would take it on.
Yeah, it's incredibly hard, and I've interviewed about 25 people to date on camera, and at various health stages, and it's incredibly difficult because I know these people, and it's not as hard when you don't know someone and you're telling a story, but this is pretty
massive. Well, thank you so much. It was very interesting, and please join us again soon. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.